So, I just want to talk to you about deconstruction. This has been a buzzword that has been going around YouTube and other places for a while now. Rhett and Link, very famously, YouTube guys, talked about how they left their Christianity because of deconstruction. They were crew missionaries for a time. Josh Harris, who wrote the book Kiss Dating Goodbye, of that he eventually divorced his wife, or they got divorced for whatever reason, and that's their business. And then he, rejected his faith, and then actually tried to sell people the opportunity to also learn how to reject their faith well. And then also another famous one is close to home for me as a Converge pastor is Pastor John Piper's son, Abraham Piper, leaving the faith and claiming deconstruction as the culprit. So I want to speak to that topic, and it's important. And so you're asking, well, why is Pastor Josh, what authority do I have to speak on this? I want to just drive home that I have actually studied it. You will read or watch videos online on the topic of deconstruction, and most of those folks are just regurgitating stuff that they've read online or videos they've seen. My bachelor's is from UW-Madison, is in philosophy. My master's is in the philosophy of religion. I've read the Quran. I've studied postmodernism. I've read the actual authors. I've read Derrida. I've read Camus. I've written papers on Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialists. I've studied these things from the perspective of the authors. I'm not regurgitating some other person's stuff. I'm also not going to vilify the view. So let's just start off. This idea of deconstruction comes out of Derrida. It's a French, would have been considered like a later postmodern existentialist. And Derrida came, and as all things that come to, infect the Bible, it came through literary criticism, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So we have German idealism that obviously affected Paul Tillich, famous existentialist theologian. But then Derrida comes along and he pushes this view of deconstructionism, which was a literary criticism. It was a way to deal with literature. It was not intended to be a worldview or anything like that at the time. So deconstruction, the strategy was to take apart or undo something. That's what deconstruction is. And I think it was 1968 that he had presented this view. I'm going to read the quote here that Van Hooser actually references, and he said that this idea of deconstruction is to go beyond the language of the system, whatever it is, in order to represent reality. So deconstructionism, if you take it from that perspective, is not necessarily evil. It's actually could be beneficial depending on who you are. If you are struggling with your faith, it might be good to break down all these different things that we put together to make Christianity a worldview, to deconstruct it, look at those different parts individually and see, are they consistent? Can I hold this and this at the exact same time? In reality, good hermeneutics and good Bible study requires some deconstruction. You have to step back and admit the fact that you don't know everything and that you need to, take a moment to reassess. The problem with deconstruction is that when it's applied with literature, but also into biblical criticism and into as a worldview, it actually loses that humility, and it gives the reader all the authority to give meaning to a text and completely ignores the intentions of the author. Correct, again, that Van Hooser, he calls it an anarchy of interpretation. And I would call it literary solipsism. It's self-contradictory. It is this idea that knowledge, the information, the meaning of a text is actually 100% dependent upon you. That's just pure garbage relativism. Obviously, that's untrue. And it's interesting that Derrida, if you read his stuff, and I'll put a link just to a couple of, just to a bio or something of Derrida on the thing. If you actually read Derrida, it's interesting that he argues for this, that the reader is the actual person that matters, while he's writing a book with the intention of teaching the reader what he means. So he's putting words to paper with intention as an author, and he wants you to walk away with meaning. And that just it's self-contradictory, because why couldn't I read his book and then just apply my own meaning to it? That's what he's literally arguing for. So in that way, deconstructionism can be arrogant. So Nietzsche would also be a precursor to that. I have tons of Nietzsche. He is by far my favorite atheist author, because I like him because he's honest. But another one too that kind of people have claimed was a deconstructionist, I've read, but is untrue, is Martin Buber. He was a Jewish philosopher, excellent theologian and philosopher in his own right. And one of the things he says, and I wrote the quote down, he says, "He who draws near with a pure heart to the divine mystery learns that he is continually with God." And this he regularly talks about the I and thou, this language of how we speak about God and this divine mystery. And it sounds very flowery and fluid or whatever, but his intentions were to just drive home there's this mystery and connection that's kind of hidden, but if you search it out, you'll come to find that God is always there. It's a very similar argument that Paul makes to the philosophers on Mars Hill, where he says that God has divided the nations and provided all these different people groups, and for what purpose? So that some might seek and find him. God is hidden from us by our own sinful nature, but he's actually closer than any friend. So to get back to the point, deconstructionism I've watched a bunch of videos and people were saying deconstructionism is to fall away, or deconstructionism is to reject the faith. That is untrue. We as Christians, we should be intellectuals. We should not be afraid of conversations. And deconstructionism is, at the very least, if you use it correctly, is a humble opportunity to kind of look at your worldview in its parts and compare and contrast. But when it's applied in the sense of you all of a sudden are the arbiter of truth, then it just becomes just relativism, and it's just postmodern garbage. So anyway, good luck as you try to study on your own. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the notes. But here's a question I have for you, and feel free to argue about it below. This is really interesting, and it might upset some people. If you look at the list of people who have very vocally left the faith through deconstructionism, you'll notice that there's a trend within them. They seem to, from the ones I've seen, come from a Calvinist background. You don't see, as far as I know, any Arminians, people with an Arminian slant of theology, deconstructing their faith. Rhett and Link, obviously Piper's son, Piper, the lead singer, I forget the guy's name, one of the authors for Desiring God, which was also a Calvinist news outlet online, created by John Piper, who's a hardcore 5-point Calvinist. Piper's son obviously grew up in a 5-point Calvinist home. I'm just curious what you guys think. Is there a link between this, this hard determinism, this Christian fatalism, and this Christian determinism, and how deconstruction kind of wrecks us? Rhett and Link actually, in one of their interviews, talked about how he really one of the struggles he had, the biggest struggles, was the idea of eternal security. This idea that once saved, always saved kind of a thing, which again is a Calvinist argument. Anyway, feel free to argue below. Keep it civil. No judgment here. I have my opinions, but If you're a Calvinist or an Arminian, I still believe you love the Lord. If you believe Jesus died for your sins and that He's the only way to heaven, so no, I'm not going to be bitter. So talk about it, and God bless you, and dig deep, and have a great day.